Hi, this is Jacob Johnson, founder of InnovaSource. I hope this finds you safe and healthy. The following is an excerpt from our recent call with our Gap Fund Accelerator program leader, Community of Action. This group meets regularly to discuss and share best practices and tactics, and also to collect reports and data that can help us all develop our programs. This particular excerpt will cover COVID response on university campuses, as well as the state of art between testing, training, and vaccination. We hope you enjoy. For more information on the Community of Action or for other resources, please visit www.universitygapfunding.com. Thank you and enjoy. But wanted to introduce Clay Christensen. Was with us last time on the call. Clay has been doing just an amazing job out at Tulane Med School on tracking some of the different things related to the happenings in and around COVID-19. And so I invited him back on to the call today to give us an update. So Clay, are you on still?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, great. I'll just go ahead to cut down on time. I'll advance your slides for you. So just prompt me with next. That's okay.
Yep. Thank you, Jacob, for having me again. In the interest of time, I'll just dive right into it. My name is Clay Christian. I work for Tulane University. I'm housed in the School of Medicine. Tulane has a really long history of engaging with infectious disease research, especially emerging zoonotic, so infectious diseases that come from animals rather suddenly. So we've been very involved from a research standpoint to the response to COVID-19. Jacob? Yeah, so the academic administrative response has been kind of mixed. There has been some coordination through groups like the AAMC, which is the American Association of Medical Colleges. Pretty universally at research institutions, actual bench science has been scaled back significantly, but most universities are now trying to put in place plans to scale back up. Unfortunately, there is no one-size-fits-all solution for universities. It really depends a lot on size of the university and size of the labs, whether or not the university has experience dealing with things like infectious disease, the location, the response of universities with urban campuses is going to look very different than the response of universities with more rural campuses. Things like that all have massive impacts on how quickly universities can dial back up their research enterprise. Fall classes across all levels are still largely TBD. We are currently working on plans for everything from all classes being online for the entire fall, all the way up to and including social distancing classes that happen on campus still. We just don't know what it's going to end up like. Currently, graduate and medical students are both volunteering across the country to help with the response to COVID-19. A lot of graduate students are actually the people in the labs that are running the diagnostic test for the disease. That's happening at a lot of different universities, especially those that have academic medical centers attached to them and hospital systems. Both graduate and medical students are also collecting materials, not only PPE, which has been on the news a lot, but also the materials that you need to run those diagnostic tests as well. Jacob? Testing update. PCR testing is still the main type of testing that we're seeing. Some of the faster versions may not be as accurate as originally advertised. Abbott had a test called their ID, based on their ID Now system, that could give results in theory in as quickly as 5 to 15 minutes. That test has a higher false negative rate than originally advertised, although the problem seems to be with a specific type of sample collection and not all the different types of tests that this is doing. This matters because PCR tests are generally a pretty time and resource intensive process. So as academic centers think about reopening, they're going to have to deal with the need to do a lot of testing. For serological surveys, which are necessary to sort of figure out how many people have been infected in any area, those are not, these are the antibody tests that appear a lot in the news. they're not going to be a magical solution that's going to let people who have antibodies go back to work immediately. There are still a lot of concerns about the accuracy of those tests. While in general, this kind of testing is great for population-based surveillance, when it comes to recommending what individual people can and cannot do based on risk factors, that's not really what they're for. There's also a question of what technology platforms are best for this. The older school method, the ELISA test, which need to be run in a lab, are much more accurate, but they're not as convenient as things like a lateral flow assay, which are the sort of take-home little tiny cartridge tests that you see on the news a lot that can be performed with just a finger stick. So we're still working on how to really optimize antibody testing.
Clay, I think it's really relevant to everybody. First of all, John from Houston just sent a message in the chat box and said that Abbott is at a 2-month waiting period to get the devices yet.
Yeah.
So you gotta include that into. So obviously testing, I think, is maybe the most important piece, at least initially, to get things rolling again. Everybody's kind of at a different stage of the curve and all that good stuff. But if you had a best guess of when, kind of a coast-to-coast sort of capability where, testing could be disseminated appropriately to all the different areas and everybody would have that capability, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but do you have a guess of when that might be?
So I don't think that that's going to happen in the foreseeable future. The centralized federal response to this at all levels has been not quite what one would hope. The reality is that places that have really robust academic research enterprises are probably going to be the places that get widespread testing first, and then it will gradually trickle out to the rest of the country. That for some places will happen sooner rather than later. The first places that probably get it, maybe within the next month to 6 weeks, are going to be medium-sized cities that happen to have good academic centers. Just because you have the advantage of having an academic medical center that can do this type of testing, but you don't have so many people like a New York or an LA where the number of people that you have to test is just so massive. At this point, I wish I had a better answer, but it's not.
I think that's a great answer. I think wheels could start to turn about the start of the research institution enterprise and also the corporate high-tech companies too as well. So, okay, we better keep moving. Sorry, just interesting. Thanks.
Next. So treatments. For remdesivir, which is the Gilead compound, that's a general antiviral that we think works by inhibiting the protein that's responsible for copying the genetic material of the virus. Very early reports say that it might work for severe or moderate cases. This is something that has to be given IV, so it's really only applicable in healthcare settings. We're really waiting still on the big data sets from Gilead. This week, there was some leaking, for lack of a better term, of early data from the University of Chicago that suggests it might be working, but it's really too soon to tell for sure. Gilead has expanded its clinical trial size for remdesivir twice now, which people think either one of two things is going on. Either they need more people to show statistical significance, which means that it doesn't work as well as it should, or they realize it does work and they want to expand access to as many people as possible. So we just don't know yet, but we should know very soon. The first big data sets for remdesivir should be coming out within the next 4 weeks. For sera and antibody-based treatments, sera seems to be pretty effective. Again, very early stage data, but it's also tricky to get because you need willing donors who have recovered from COVID. And also the variability from person to person as far as how effective their individual sera are is really high. Antibodies, which are the bits and pieces of that sera that are actually the effective treatment part, are being developed by a number of biotechs, including Vir, which is this infectious disease focused company that's probably the furthest along as far as having the most capital distribution and expertise in this area. But there are a number of biotechs and pharma companies that are pursuing antibodies, and trials for those should start sometime in the summer at the earliest. Different immune system modifiers, so these are things that help treat the symptoms of the virus, but not the virus itself. They're currently in trials. The big one right now is IL-6 antibody. So this is a protein signaling molecule that drives inflammation during assorted illnesses. Again, early data suggests it might be appropriate for severe hospitalized patients, but we just don't know. For chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine, the data is not very promising. There have been a lot of preprints published within the past 2 weeks that really call the efficacy of these into question. But again, large-scale clinical trials, we're still waiting on the data from those. And then for ventilators and other support mechanisms, the NIH has started to recommend scaling back their use just because there is data coming out of trauma centers and ICUs that have a lot of patients on ventilators that suggests that they're not necessarily appropriate for everyone who's hypoxic, and the mortality for people once you put them on a ventilator is very high. So they're trying to scale back ventilators as a supportive treatment for hospitalized people with COVID. Jacob? As far as vaccines go, the earliest ones that are proceeding rapidly through clinical trials are all DNA and RNA-based vaccines. So the one that's gotten the most press is Moderna's RNA-based vaccine, which is currently in phase 1 trials in both Atlanta and in Washington State. BARDA just threw $483 million at them to help with this development. This is the one where from the time that the viral genome was sequenced to someone actually injecting it into humans was something like 62 days, which is the fastest a vaccine has ever been developed. But it will be a while before they get any efficacy data on this vaccine. The absolute earliest would be late summer, early fall. There's also DNA-based vaccines that are also in trial from Inovio. Vector-borne subunit expression, so J&J is also in a collaboration with BARDA. Both of them have thrown in a total of $1 billion to try and get this vaccine platform off the ground. They are not in human trials yet. There are a couple others that are out of academia at the very early stage that have been published on either in journals or preprints, but they're all extremely early stage, nowhere close to humans, nowhere close to even GMP for most of them. And a lot of them are based on MERS and SARS approaches, or more traditional vaccine approaches as well. As far as where we, for our daily summaries of COVID, and where our leadership get a lot of their information, I have a slide here with a bunch of hyperlinks and descriptions of what each of these things are. Lit COVID is the NIH's COVID-19 research portal, where they not only collect all of the papers that have been indexed on PubMed, but they bin them based on subject area. NIH just released a comprehensive living document on treatment guidelines within the last 48 hours, which will be very useful for people who are active, for those of you that have academic medical centers attached to your universities. That's going to be essential for people. COVID-19 preprints. bioRxiv and medRxiv have done the same kind of thing that the NIH PubMed has done with Lit COVID, only they don't bin them by category, so it's a little bit trickier to go through. The NIH has also started collecting all preprints and all papers in a database that you can actually do searches on and manipulate in their COVID portfolio tracker. Faster Cures and the Milken Institute have got a living document set up where they're tracking all the therapeutics and all the vaccine efforts, which is updated fairly regularly. It's pretty useful, and it tracks everything from stuff in clinical trials all the way down to like people have barely hinted that they're planning on developing something, so it's pretty comprehensive. And then of course we have our Tulane University Daily Digest newsletter that our leadership also uses. And that's where we are. That's the quick and dirty state of research around COVID-19, at least how Tulane sees it.
Great, Clay. Well, thank you so much for the update. I'm for sure going to ask you back on our next call, if not sooner, because you just do a really good job of summarizing what's up there. And I would point anybody that's out there, I'm just kidding, to take a look at the newsletter that Clay puts together. It's just a very good summary that I read daily. I'll include that link too with the recording and the materials from today. So, up on Clay's presentation on the general COVID response on campuses and other updates related to treatments and cures and testing procedures, I wanted to give a quick update report on the recent survey that we did on University Gap Fund Accelerator programs and their related COVID responses. So we had about 35 universities reporting. I'm going to keep this information up to date so they're to kind of follow how things roll out here in the next couple months. But generally speaking, I wanted to provide a summary. It looks like TTO and venture groups are largely still active, but have slowed down significantly. One interesting takeaway from this to me was about 75% of the research enterprise, both federally sponsored and also industrial research, either slowed down or halted completely, which obviously has implications to the input component of all of our processes in the commercialization pipeline. Secondly, when polled, Gap Fund managers said that their programs are running at about a 68% out of 100% efficiency. So still active, but maybe, as we said a little bit earlier, slowed down a bit. And then looking at specific components within the gap funding process itself, one of the bigger takeaways was a lot of the stuff obviously has moved virtually. And then also just the opening up of this kind of break, I guess if you want to call it forced break, into exploring some new opportunities with inventors that are out there and really strengthening those relationships. But things like, advisory board mentorships and EIR programs, some of the different consultants and other project supports have been moved largely virtual. And then some of the events, for obvious reasons, physically have taken some hits, and some are either postponing those this year indefinitely or looking for more virtual approaches to reschedule. Now, talking about going virtual itself, to the right here is a list of some of the more popular software programs that groups are using. I'm sure you see a couple on that list that you have implemented within your program. Looking at the left here, generally talking CRM, customer relationship management software, project and process, and portfolio management. And then also just, I think the popular one right now, obviously, is teleconferencing and team meetup potential. One interesting takeaway here was when asked about the budget concerns with this, about 97% of the institutions that responded were already either using these programs or had budgeted for it, and or are receiving additional funds from their leadership. So it looks like this is something that's been recognized as important and has been resourced appropriately. Finally, some takeaways when asked about positives and challenges about the current environment. Starting with some of the challenges, obviously in-person meetings bring a lot of energy, creativity. So one of the fears is the loss of that in doing these virtual meetings. Speaking about some of the challenges, what I guess would also be a pro, meetings are generally more efficient because nobody likes to sit on a webcam all day, but maybe less personal. There's obviously family and other distractions on and off the screen itself. And then looking at, rescheduling some of those cancellations in the, some of the events that people had scheduled. Looking at the pros side of things, mentioned earlier the upside of having a little bit more time, not only your own time, but also your inventor time as well, to really get some of those meetings on the board and start talking about some future opportunities once we get out of this situation that you might be able to implement to start backfilling some of the pipeline itself. One of the other things here is we've talked a lot about the idea of leveraging the virtual tools in many aspects of our GAP and Accelerator programs, but really this has forced us to do that. So one of the more interesting things is to think about, as we roll out of this, what do we keep? What have we learned? What can we implement? Things like advisory boards. Why do advisors need to be in person to our meetings? Many of us are already using virtual advisory boards. As more and more people become comfortable with these tools, we can look to expand those advisor networks using our social networks and elsewhere to really bring them into the discussion. And then, using this sort of force break itself gives an opportunity to really create a more efficient process around that. The last thing I think here is, we've got a lot more on our plates in different ways. But generally speaking to our programs, there is some level of a break that gives us an opportunity to really think about our programs, our processes, our strategies, and all of that. So it's a very exciting time, and I just encourage all of you to take this time to do that, and then to bring in events like this so we can discuss it and all learn from each other. So I think that's the last slide. And now I'm going to bring in WARF, who is going to give us one example of a sort of spin-off from a more general accelerator program into something that's a little bit more COVID related. And they've just put a new program in place. So I'm going to bring them on to discuss that now. So thank you very much. Bring you in.
Yes, I'm on. Thanks for having me. I've learned a lot, so I appreciate all the learning so far. I'm just going to give a brief overview. I assume some of you are familiar with WARF and UW-Madison, so I won't spend the time there because Jacob had asked to talk about this program specifically. We just rolled it out this week, and so what we did was carve out a portion of money from our existing fund for accelerator projects, which is about $100,000. That we could use towards this accelerator challenge. So basically we're looking to spend $5,000 to $10,000 per project. We realize it's not a lot of money, but really our focus was more on connecting investigators and their technologies to resources. So oftentimes we want to incentivize them to disclose their ideas, but also to leverage our network. So what we are finding is that what's more valuable is to connect them to UW Hospital to maybe see if whatever they're considering is actually going to be usable there. They have an opportunity to test it out. We could connect them with prototyping facilities, whether it's on campus in makerspaces or out in the community with corporate partners. And so that was kind of our main focus. So far, we've received 5 applications that would fit the requirements. As you probably know, closer to the deadline, which is early May, we're expecting more to come in. It's pretty broad, so we're looking for really anything that could be designed to speed up development of prototypes or any highly deployable concept that could be implemented within the next 6 to 12 months, considering the time frame we're looking at. So anything around devices to protect workers, sanitation improvements, research tools, anything related to patient care, or even just advancing public education around the virus. You know, again, our goal was to broaden our view and have more of a social impact. Historically, we look to obviously drive returns, and most of the stipulations for our projects are that they already have disclosed and accepted their technology to WARF. So we have WARF IP. We've removed that to kind of encourage a broader range of applications. I guess the other things I could speak to also, we also have a ventures group, which the accelerator program sits under, and so that's where we invest directly into startups. And we have 18 portfolio companies in our that are currently active, and so we immediately instituted some CEO roundtables. So we're having some weekly virtual meetings that have been really useful in just sharing best practices, specifically around the very beginning of the crisis, where there was a lot of question around funding available and whether our startups should be applying for SBA funding in the PPP program. And so that's been really helpful. We're also lucky at WARF that we have an entire department devoted to programming. So that's where we can bridge what WARF's doing with what else is happening on campus and in the community. So at the beginning of the crisis, again, we did a program covering all the resources, and that had a lot of speakers, a panel discussion about different resources available. And then we're looking to do more related to the science as we move forward. And then ultimately, hopefully in the next few months, how we can position ourselves for recovery.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Katie, for sharing with us.
Yeah.
And just for the sake of time, I'm going to move to Tom Lipkin, who's going to share a couple things too, back on the UCLA Innovation Fund front and what they're doing relative to COVID response.
Our efforts aren't well. Our efforts are definitely new, but not maybe as well organized. We are putting up our technologies on our website, so you can now go under search for technologies and type in COVID and see all of our aggregated available technologies. We've also put up a COVID-19 funding and resources page that is as extensive as we possibly can. It's kind of broken out into different stakeholders and what they might find and hopefully they can find sources of funding or connections that might be of interest for them. The other thing that we have been doing just with our faculty members is, because we have kind of the project management capabilities for our innovation fund projects, my team is definitely connecting various stakeholders on campus that might not otherwise know about each other. So we have an active BSL-3 facility that handles all of the COVID-related work, but you have different engineers that have solutions, et cetera. So we're just trying to coordinate all those efforts on campus. And then next slide. There. We also are doing our Spotlight series. Our first is actually later today for those that are interested. It is at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. And we have 3 of our faculty members that are talking about their solution or their technologies in response to COVID-19.